r/NoSleep. Posted by u/Mr_Mojo_Rising95. I started a new job as an overnight security guard at a private cemetery. The previous guard gave me list of rules which I can't comprehend. Chapter 2. While time seemed to stand still, the only thing that appeared to move was the angel statue way out in the sea of dead grass. I tried to keep busy, to find some meaning in this barren void. My attempts went unnoticed. I hesitated straying too far from the hut, fearing it may disappear just as quick as it appeared once before when I first discovered it. Yet, the longer I was there, the closer the statue came. I felt no hunger, no thirst, no desire to sleep. Within this void, time seemed warped. What scared me most of all was the sun was not even hot, despite it shining bright high up in the sky, without a cloud to be seen. Everything seemed neutral here. While I typed my story up to this point, I searched the web, and watched countless hours of videos. Over the day, my eyes began to strain. My camera reflection painted a horrible picture of myself. I looked as if I aged 10 years, with big dark bags under my eyes. My mind raced back to my earliest encounters with Robert, the previous day shift worker who always looked perpetually tired, ghoul-like. While I thought back to his initial warning, telling me that the morning shift was worse, I struggled to refrain from thinking about him being wheeled out in a body bag with a gaping hole through his car windshield laced with blood. While I waited, and waited, I noticed a similar pattern emerging. Every time I looked away from the sea of grass, the angel statue out in the field appeared to get closer. Was this a mirage? My mind playing tricks on me? I had to put it to the test. With all my concentration I could gather, I ducked under the desk to watch videos. Thinking the longer I stayed away from looking outside, the closer the statue might come, then something. Maybe I could do something when it's closer to me. Under the desk, a couple of candles and a rusty tin of oil were stacked neatly. I pushed them to the side, keeping the oil close for when the statue came closer. With my laptop ready, I hunkered down. With little concept of time I had, I again watched hours of videos, wrote, surfed the web looking for anything that could help me. Nothing online could I find in relation to the cemetery. It was like history had erased it from existence. Or whatever knowledge was held about this place was trapped in the void with me. Under the desk, I once again heard the rustling out from the fields. The ground trembled every once in a while but I stayed put. When I could not hold out any further, I moved out from the desk. The sun was bright in the sky, beaming with rays. To my surprise, the angel statue had to be no more than 30 feet from the hut. I gazed upon her with wonder. Her outstretched hands appeared welcoming but the sinister crack down her face made the hairs on my arm stick up. She had an aura to her, one that felt like I was being pulled to her. The closer she came, the more powerful the pull was. I ducked under the desk, back to the internet and after some time, I emerged. No more than 5 feet from the hut, the angel statue stood firmly in place. I grabbed the oil tin and ventured out towards the statue. The plains were calm, the grass seemed slightly longer than I remember, brushing up almost to my knees. I made my way towards her, keeping focus on her. Closer the pulling felt, it felt comforting, warm. I looked back and the warm feeling went cold. The hut was gone, replaced by the dead grass plains. My heart sank, but what did I have to lose at this point? While time was at a standstill here, so was my life. When I turned back towards the statue, which was now a few inches from me, I nearly leapt out of my skin. We were nose to nose, or where her nose should be. The crack was strewn down her concrete face, disturbing yet inviting. The heat generating from her was radiating. I lightly touched down her arm towards her hand, which was increasingly hotter. Soon the pain in my finger began to be overwhelming. I looked at my new reconstructed fingers which were now starting to turn a greenish black. With panic setting in, I poured the oil over her head, and like the last gravestone I did this to, she started to melt. I fell backwards as the pain in my fingers began to sear, waves of agony from the tips of my finger up my arm. I writhed down the floor as she stood over me, blocking out the sun. I bit down on my lips, tasting metallic blood in my mouth as the pain surged through me like electricity. As the oil worked, melting her by the moments, her eclipse was fading as the sun was emerging behind her. Soon she was nothing more than a back-bubbling puddle on the ground. The pain in my body slowly receded. I got to my feet, the wind started to pick up and the pulling force had completely dropped. I scanned the area and right behind me was the hut, clear as day. The grand oak tree, the porta-potty and more importantly my car. I raced towards the hut, tears streaming down my face. Wiping them away I noticed a laminated note neatly placed on the table. I shakily picked up the paper which was headed, Morning shift rules. The lump in my throat bobbed within as I read aloud the rules to myself, trembling. 1. Any visitors to the cemetery must escorted to their grave. Do not ask any personal questions. 2. Graves that appear to move must have oil poured over them. 3. If the grave digger appears at any point, you must find an empty coffin and close yourself until he leaves. 4. The night walkers will stalk you from dark areas around the cemetery, but pay no mind to them, but do not destroy any of their flowers. 5. Lastly, if the grand mausoleum atop the hilltop door is open, try to survive until your shift is over. Rule 5 really put me at ease then. The rules burned into my head. Over and over I scanned through them. A knock on the door caused me to nearly wet myself. Pressed against the glass was the pimply-faced teen, his braced teeth grinning ear to ear as he pulled on the doorknob. I let him in, wiping the tears from my eyes. The pimply-faced teen spoke. "Geez man, you look pretty tired." I laughed to myself. The feeling of déjà vu washed over me. Before I could speak, I noticed the landscape around me was back to normal, like I was transported back to reality. I looked at my watch, 7 p.m. The pimply-faced teen threw his bag onto the floor and began texting away. "You're lucky you don't have the morning rules," I manically laughed to myself, making my way to my car. Those similar thoughts of Robert raced back to me. I peeled out down the cemetery path, racing past gravestones while the moon settled high above me. I never thought I'd wish to see nighttime again. When I got home, I called my parents. They were horrified when I talked to them, saying that I had disappeared for over a week and the police were looking for me. Before I could give them an explanation, the call cut out. I tried redialing but I wasn't able to get a single. I tried different numbers but to no avail. The waves of drowsiness were really starting to take effect. I struggled to keep my eyes open. Soon my conscience closed in like elevator doors and I was out. I awoke in the early morning hours. No missed calls from my parents, just one call from an unknown number and a voicemail. I cautiously played the voicemail. "Hello Henry, glad to have you back with us. Rest assured your parents are okay but they won't be talking to you anytime soon. You are expected back at the cemetery at 5 a.m. sharp. I assume you have the rules with you. Oh, lastly Henry, do not try to reach out for help. You are our property now and we are keeping a very close watch on you." The man's voice cut out sharply. I raced to get dressed, gathering my things. I noticed a shiny silver Cadillac parked across the street with tinted black windows. While I got to my car and made my way to the cemetery, I noticed more and more Cadillacs tucked away. I pulled towards the cemetery road and braced for my second shift, the sun just starting to peek out from past the treetop. As I got myself ready for the morning shift, the dull throb in my hand was coming in waves. It was tender to the touch, like I had an old burn on it that was still healing. My mind raced back to being thrusted into the fire by the golden masked men. I slapped myself back to reality and gathered my things, heading towards the cemetery once more. Again, on my route there, Cadillacs seemed to be tucked away at every corner. I could not shake the feeling that they were watching me. The sun was peeking out over the treetops this morning. It was looking to be a clear day. As I drove along the winding cemetery road, I was getting a better look at the cemetery during the day. It almost looked peaceful. Waiting for me inside the hut was the pimply-faced teen, his head resting down on the table. I pulled up alongside the hut, where he nearly jumped out of his seat. He looked shaken already. We met by the door, exchanged a glance that said we both knew what crazy shit we were in, yet we were still here. "Hey man, you're looking pretty tired. Everything okay?" His voice cracking an octave or two. "Yeah, just been a long few days, that's all," I replied, wiping the sleep from my eyes. "How was your night?" The teen looked around anxiously. "Well, it was weird to be honest. A gravestone started popping up all around me, so I went to pour the oil over it, you know. When I was out there, the gravestone started to melt, which was cool but freaked me out a bit. After I did, a few other stones started to appear, so I went out to them as well." "You weren't out longer than 10 minutes, were you?" I cautiously interrupted, my brow raised, feeling like a seasoned vet. "No, I was quick, but on my way back to the hut, I walked by this angelic statue with a crack running down her face." The teen looked defeated in that moment. It struck me as weird, as I never saw a gravestone like her before, so I checked the rules and there it was. It says not to venture out past her, but I didn't even see her when I initially went out, the teen tried to explain, looking around ever so more. "Did anything else happen that night?" I asked, the feeling of dread starting to creep up on me. No, nothing happened, but I started getting this itchy rash on my arm." The teen lifted his sleeve. A scaly red rash about the size of my hand was up his arm. "It's really starting to bug me. I might try to get some cream for it." "Yay, that's pretty strange man. Be careful of that statue. She's more than she lets out to be, I warned. "Alright, will do, stay safe out there," the teen replied. "I'll try, man, you too," I nodded, watching the teen trail off down the windy dirt road. While I got myself situated, I went over the night rules that I had tucked away in my pocket. Any visitors to the cemetery must escorted to their grave. Do not ask any personal questions. Graves that appear to move must have oil poured over them. If the grave digger appears at any point, you must find an empty coffin and close yourself until he leaves. The night walkers will stalk you from dark areas around the cemetery, but pay no mind to them, but do not destroy any of their flowers. Lastly, if the grand mausoleum atop the hilltop door is open, try to survive until your shift is over. Seems simple enough, I thought. I definitely knew the consequences of not following them. While I scanned over the rules, a buzzing from my phone caught my attention. A bank statement, a direct deposit of 2 weeks' pay sent to me. While I hummed over the money that filled my account, the day was only just about to begin. Like usual, the shift started slow. I counted each gravestone I saw, which is vastly easier during the day. I could get a great view of the cemetery during the day, seeing the rolling hills. The scenery was kept very tightly where it was lush with trees, bushes, and various plants. I scanned the horizon, making sure to refer back to the rules after every so often. About midway through the shift, when the effects of boredom were sweeping over me, something caught my attention. Over one of the hills, a shape in the distance began to form. My sight blinded by the sharp rays that day, I struggled to see what looked like a man walking closer to the hut. While he came closer in my view, the older man took on more features. He lumbered as he walked, dragging behind in one hand a rusty old shovel. His gray straggly beard hung loosely down his face. With a straw hat and blue dusty overalls, his bizarre gait began to set off red flags in my mind. I read over the rules and there it was, number 3. If the grave digger appears at any point, you must find an empty coffin and close yourself until he leaves. Great, now I got to get into a coffin before this guy gets near me. I gathered my things and nervously stepped out into the cemetery, the fresh air filling my lungs. The gravedigger was close, his solid white eyes tracking me down like a predator stalking prey. His lack of pupils formed a sick, inhuman feeling within me. I began to sprint out into the cemetery, the gravedigger changing course to each direction I went. He picked up his pace while I did the same. I desperately looked for an open grave, hoping I could find one with a casket. Something I had never seen within this cemetery before. At a full sprint, he trailed behind me, huffing and grunting like a rabid animal, dragging behind his shovel which clanged against the gravestones. Sweat was racing down my face now, I could almost feel his breath on my neck. He lumbered over me, the shadow he cast above me nearly blocking out the sun. I dug deep within myself, taking a sharp right down a steep hill. His long sharp nails clawed into my back. I yelped, but the sudden course of direction threw me off, and apparently, him as well. I stepped from the turn, twisted my ankle which sent me tumbling down the hill. I ragdolled all the way down, crashing into an overgrown pile of brush. While I gathered myself, with adrenaline still pumping, the gravedigger carefully tracked his way down the hill. I got to my feet and scanned the area, seeing a large mound of loose dirt piled next to a grave. A light bulb went off in my head and I beelined to the empty grave. Faced with the dirt pile in front of me, the gravedigger wasn't too far away but gaining ground quick. I looked down into the grave and 6 feet below the surface, an old wooden coffin sat. I let out breaths of hot air, trying to control my breath as the gravedigger trudged on. I jumped into the grave and lifted up the coffin lid. A feral smell resonated from the coffin, nearly causing me puke up my breakfast. Stinging my nostrils and watering my eyes, I hopped into the coffin which was filled with loose dirt and debris. I closed the lid, surrounding myself in the foulness and let myself succumb to the darkness. I prayed this would work as I heard the gravedigger get closer. He stood at the side of the grave huffing and puffing, letting out a guttural growl every once a while. While I waited, which felt like an eternity, I felt a sprinkle of dirt hitting the coffin. The gravedigger was burying me alive, feeling the weight of the dirt pile onto the coffin. The wooden coffin creaked after each shovelful that was put on, the grunts of the gravedigger being drowned out. I struggled inside the narrow coffin, hyperventilating as I screamed out. Soon, the world went quiet. The shoveling stopped and all I was left with was the darkness of the suffocating coffin. How long could I be in here for, I wondered as I struggled to hold off a panic attack. I checked my watch, 4 hours to go before my shift ends. The weight of the coffin lid was heavy, not budging an inch. I dreadfully tried to calm myself down. All sense of time was lost and the claustrophobic feeling never fully went away. Like a true blessing, the minutes before my shift ended winded down, I needed to make a move. I pressed lightly on the coffin lid where in the past barely moved, now moved with much ease. My back ached with pain from the gravedigger's scratch. I lifted harder this time, creaking open the side expecting a flood of dirt to come in. When no dirt emerged, I lifted more and the coffin lid came right off. The grave was empty. I stood there puzzled, the full moon above me starting to take shape as nighttime approached. I lifted myself up out of the grave, freezing to see any sights of the gravedigger. When nothing appeared, I made my way hastily back to the hut, passing by the gravedigger's rusty shovel which was stuck into the dirt pile. On cue, I emerged from the darkness to meet the pimply-faced teen waiting out front of the hut. He looked at me, covered in dirt, and asked what I had been up to. Before I could answer, the ham radio in the hut went off. We looked at each other solemnly as the teen took one last hit of his vape and went to answer the radio. I patted him on the back before getting into my car and headed home. My ankle was sore and my back was caked with dried blood. Once I got home, I showered off the dried blood and dirt and thought long and hard about my life. How long was I going to keep this up before something terrible happens? Something terrible like meeting Robert's fate. I thought hard that night, developing a plan I think may work. With a heavy head from a long day, I slept like a log till early that morning.